And now it's my total honor and thrill to introduce Marianne Williamson. And it's a particular honor to host her in her hometown of Texas, of Houston. And to, I have a family here and friends. Marianne has been a key part of the Working Results for the last decade and a half. For those of you that don't know her, which I can't believe there's actually anyone, she's an internationally acclaimed author, lecturer, immensely powerful activist. That may be something that not all of you are aware of. Her books have influenced and inspired tens of millions of people. 6 of her 10 books have been on the New York Times bestseller list, and 4 have been #1 bestsellers. Her blogs and her writing on policy, politics, and spirituality are something that personally inspire and guide me, and they're followed by hundreds of thousands of people. In 2006, Newsweek magazine poll named her one of the 50 most influential baby boomers. I just spoke about the AIDS issue. Marianne was among the earliest advocates on that issue, bringing national attention, also direct support. She founded a project, Angel Food with Meals on Wheels programs that serves homebound people with AIDS in the Los Angeles area. And today that project serves over 1,000 people daily. And if I can just speak a bit more personally, Results is incredibly proud. Marianne's been a board member and a mentor and advisor for many years. She is a visionary who's married the spiritual with the activist. A few years ago, she led an amazing delegation of women to a summit we organized in Kenya on expanding access for the world's poorest women to microloans to start businesses. And her insights at that summit have changed the course of our work to advance microcredit for the poorest. Her call to action, to activism, has brought some of the most energetic new people to Results in some of our most active new chapters, one of which is being started in about a week from now. And she has this remarkable ability to see what's needed on the national and global agenda and to speak with inspiration, honesty, and deep clarity in a way that moves people and moves some of the world's most important issues. So it's just a huge pleasure to welcome Marianne Williamson. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
That was such a generous introduction, Joanne. Thank you. And I'm here because Joanne asked me to come, and it is a testament to what kind of leader Joanne is that I think I'm among many who pretty much do whatever Joanne asks us to do. And of course, the direct request from Claudia Morgan and David Schubert, obviously when I met them in Washington, D.C., representatives of, as Joanne said, my own hometown, born and raised in Houston. My mother was born and raised in Houston. The work here is obviously of such a high quality, so it's an honor to be with all of you tonight. Several weeks ago, I was in Israel, and I had the honor of meeting with the American ambassador there. And he said something to me in that meeting that really made me think. He said the majority of Israelis and the majority of Palestinians do not hate each other. He said they fear each other, but they do not hate each other. He said, now among Israelis and among Palestinians, there are small groups of haters, there's no doubt about that. And he said, obviously, they can do a lot of damage. And when I thought about that, I thought about how you could say that about the entire world. In the United States, not a lot of people hate, but enough to do some damage. In the Arab world, not a lot of people, if you look at the whole civilization, hate, but that's enough to do some damage. If you look at the entire human race, I think we would all agree that the vast majority of people who live on this earth are decent, good-hearted people. They want to be able to make a living, they want to be able to feed their children, they want to put a roof over their children's heads. A relatively tiny proportion of the human race has hearts that are filled with hate. Now, given that fact, why is the world in the state that it's in? Now that seems interesting to me. In other words, why is it that hate is so powerful on the planet, given the fact that more people love than hate? I've noticed every time there's been any kind of a terrorist incident, either domestically or internationally, it always seems to me that the American president, no matter who he has been, has always said, these cowardly acts will not be tolerated. And every time that there's a terrorist act referred to by an American president as cowardly, I tilt my head. Heinous? Absolutely. Evil, no doubt about it. Possibly unforgivable, certainly a theological valid question. But cowardly, I'm not so sure. We need to deal with the fact that, in fact, hatred has a perverse kind of courage. If you look at terrorists, one thing you have to give them, they're convicted. And they will do whatever it takes to effectuate the worldview that they wish to see prevail, even if it's a worldview that you and I find absolutely horrifying. So what that means is the emotion behind hate, the conviction behind hate, is what's called a force multiplier. And hate has been turned into a political and social force on this planet. So the problem is not in the numbers. The problem is not that there are so many haters compared to so many lovers. The problem is that those who hate on this planet hate with a conviction that those who love need to stand on in just the same way. We need to turn love into a social and political force, the way some have turned hate into just that. Martin Luther King, speaking about Mahatma Gandhi, said that Gandhi had taken the love ethic of Jesus Christ. Now, to Martin Luther King, it was the love ethic of Jesus Christ. To Mahatma Gandhi, it was the love ethic that he felt was at the heart of all the great world's religious and spiritual teaching. But Martin Luther King said that he had taken that love ethic, and Gandhi had lifted it above mere personal interaction, and he had turned it into a broad-scale social force for good. Now, to me, that's what an organization like Results represents. It represents taking the highest and most noble and most humanitarian ideals, ideals that are at the heart of the yearning and the desire of the vast, vast, vast majority of people on this planet, and turns it into a political force, turns it into a social force. Because when it comes to God's army, when it comes to love's army, which is a volunteer army, then just as with a military army, you can't just tell your soldiers, just go out there and try to kill somebody. No. These things are organized. These things are strategized. When we have to, when we feel, or sometimes there have been some times when many of us didn't feel, but certainly there have been times when most of us did feel, that military action of some kind was necessary. An army is organized. An army is trained. A war is strategized. And we must begin to do the same thing with the peace building that love represents, that our military do with wars when they feel they need to fight them. They must be strategized, and that's the kind of thing that an organization like Results does. And its warriors, the warriors of love, the warriors of peace must be trained. And that is what Results does with Results volunteers. And what happens then is that love, instead of being kind of dissipated, instead of being, as it is in far too many cases, passive, becomes this active force which can do nothing less than turn the world around in time. You know, growing up in Houston, Texas, my mother was a very traditional housewife here. And I was of a generation of women who looked at the lives of women like my mother, and I now see very erroneously thought that my mother's life wasn't quite important enough. I wanted to go out into the world. Well, it took me decades, but I finally got there. I got to the understanding that when it comes to the archetype of women, and when it comes to the mission of women who have been given by God a special mission on this earth, just as men have been, I realized that my mother was right about something. We are the mothers of this earth, and we are the homemakers of this earth. Except it's not just our own biological children that we're responsible for. And it's not just our own nuclear families and our own homes that we're responsible for. Women mature to the realization, I think, that this entire earth is our home, and every child on it is one of our children. That is the love. That is the love that will save the world. We have come to a time on this planet when it's not enough to just love our own children. We have to love the children on the other side of town and on the other side of the world. We have now the need to evolve in our understanding. Once again, looking at women, you know, there is a particular anthropological characteristic of every advanced mammalian species that survives and thrives, which is this: the absolutely fierce behavior of the adult female of that species when she senses there is a threat to her cubs. Look at the lioness when she senses there's a threat to her cubs. Look at the bears, The mama bear, when she senses that there is a threat to her cubs. Look at any animal in nature when she senses there is a threat to her cubs. And the fact that the women of the human race, for all practical purposes, are behaving in a rather perversely content way, complacent in the face of the enormous threats to the young of this species, actually would denote a species not actively intending to survive. I think one of the reasons that we are all so interested in the story of the Titanic, it's a kind of myth at this point that just captures the imagination of the modern Western person. It's not just because it was a good movie, though indeed it was. I think it's because we all have this eerie sense that we are on the Titanic. We are headed for that iceberg. That iceberg could take many different forms. It could take a form of nuclear catastrophe. It could take the form of a weather catastrophe. It could take many different forms. What matters now, though, is that we have to turn the ship around. And just like with the real Titanic, it wasn't enough to just turn it around. They needed to turn it around in time. By the time the captain of the Titanic tried to turn the ship around, he would have been better off not even trying, because the turn at that point was too late. If you look at the probability vectors for the human race at this time, the probability vectors, ladies and gentlemen, are very grim. What's going to happen? What can happen? What can happen is that we can shift out of probability into possibility. And you can only do that where there is love. Now, I said to the American ambassador that it seemed to me that when you look at this seemingly intractable situation between the Israelis and the Palestinians, that the current political dialogue is simply inadequate to the task of making the breakthroughs possible that need to happen. That there is an emotional dimension that is missing. There is a psychological dimension that is missing. There is a spiritual dimension that is missing. Because when you actually deal with Israelis and Palestinians, Christians, Jews, and Arabs in that part of the world, what you see, of course, is that we're simply talking about human beings. But when you're talking about Palestinians and Israelis, you're talking about two groups of people, both of whom are victims of abuse. And neither of whom can rise out of that trigger of what abuse has done to them in order to be able to understand more than intellectually, to extend themselves into the love, into the heart, and the pain and the suffering of the other. That love, which Martin Luther King said is more powerful than bullets. It is time for that love to do for us what alone no military can do, what alone no technology can do, what alone no warfare can do. We have to now turn love into the social and political force that it can be in a way that alone can turn this ship of human history around. There's a famous quote by Teilhard de Chardin, the French philosopher. And he said, one day after mastering the tides and the winds and gravity, humanity will harness for God the power of love. He said, and then, for the second time in history, mankind will have discovered fire. And as I said before, God's armies are a volunteer army. For surely, no matter what our religious or spiritual tradition, we believe that we are on this earth to love each other. In A Course in Miracles, there's a line which I find fascinating. It says, love restores reason, and not the other way around. Our task as a generation is to make a huge transition, a transition from one in which the Western world has basically used economics to order our civilization, to one in which we order our civilization according to humanitarian principles and not simply economic principles. We have, for the last 4 or 5 decades in this country, in ways that were previously simply unheard of, made the financialization of everything our credo. Money our bottom line, even in places where in a normal human life, money alone would not be your bottom line. And has that served us to make money the bottom line everywhere? Or has it not, by knocking us out of our moral center, in fact tanked this economy? Love will not ruin things. Love does not release chaos. Love brings everything back around. And so at this point, as we face the situation that humanity finds itself in today, I think the vast majority of people, number one, feel that something's not exactly right. We're in trouble. There's a sense of peril in the human race. And I think that on one hand, if you look at these facts, 17,000 children on this planet die of hunger every day. 17,000 children on this planet die of hunger every single day. As Joanne was mentioning, I went a couple of years ago, I guess, right, to Kenya. My first introduction to results was through its founder, Sam Daly Harris, who is now head of the Microcredit Summit campaign. I was in Kenya, and it was so exciting for those of us from the United States who were there because he was receiving such accolades from the Queen of Spain and all these great international figures. And we went to visit Kibera. Kibera is the single largest slum in the world. 2 million people live in an area of 2 square miles. Hundreds of people share one latrine. It was an absolutely devastating experience being there all day. And when we left, I was walking along with a man who was a parliamentarian from Canada. And we were silent as we walked out, but both of us had the same thought. Because when he said it, it's exactly what I'd been thinking. He looked over at me and he said, "We get to leave." And we went back to the Intercontinental Hotel. And I threw myself on my comfortable mattress. And I thought to myself, I can't wait to take a hot shower. I can't wait to call room service and get a hot meal. And it struck me like a brick to my forehead. I had just spent the day with people who not only would not be sleeping that night on a soft mattress, they never had, and they probably never would. I have been spending the day with people who would not be taking a hot shower. In fact, they never had, and they probably never would. And they would not be having a hot meal from room service tonight. They never had, and they probably never would. And when you see something like that up close, you are absolutely impacted viscerally in a way that you can never ever forget. When I heard Jeffrey Sachs, the famous economist up at Columbia University, talking about places like Kibera, these are called the bottom billion. The bottom billion people on this planet who live on $1.25 or less a day. The bottom billion. Above them are the second bottom billion, $2 and less a day. But Jeffrey Sachs and other economists have absolutely established that for $100 billion spent over 10 years, we could eradicate deep poverty from this planet. That is 1/7 of the amount that the United States spends on defense every year. 1/7 of the money that we spend on defense every year over 10 years could eradicate deep poverty from this planet. And that's the problem I have with a lot of groups out there talking about this intractable problem of poverty in Africa, this intractable problem of poverty in the United States, this intractable problem of poverty throughout the world. Ladies and gentlemen, that is an obfuscation. It is not intractable. It is not where we put our efforts. It is not where we put our resources. It has not been our bottom line. And the day that it becomes that, the day that the conversation that is in this room, the day that the conversation, the efforts of an organization like Results becomes the powerful political and social force that it can be, when enough of us, and yes, I do believe that it is the mission of women to in some way lead this voice, because do we not do this in our homes? Do we not do this in our homes? Are we not those who say, well, how are we going to feed the babies? How are we going to feed the babies? How are we going to feed the babies? When that voice, when that conversation becomes force multiplied, the way, as I said before, hatred has already become force multiplied, then we will change this world more quickly than some would like to make us believe, let us believe, that it is possible. Oh, it is more than possible. Some people say, how can you just say love would save the world? Well, why shouldn't we say that? We haven't tried it yet. And so when you look at an organization like Results, to me, and I know that all of us are drawn here for the same reason, it's because we look at the humanitarian goals of an organization like that. Look at the U.S. Congress today. The U.S. Congress today, there are 6 fully paid corporate lobbyists for every single congressman and senator in the United States. But a poor child has no financial leverage. A child who doesn't have the capacity to read has no vested financial leverage in the halls of Congress. Look at what Brandon was talking about Denisha. Denisha, who was in the 8th grade at a school here in Houston, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of Denishas throughout the United States. Denisha in the 8th grade could read at a 4th grade level. And she was fortunate. She had a Brandon to help her. She had a Brandon to help her and get her to the point where she is now at LSU. This is a miracle. But we must not forget that there are so many Denishas who never find their Brandon. And we know where they end up, ladies and gentlemen. They fill the prisons of the United States. And building prisons in the United States is the single largest urban industry. How obscene and immoral is that? So what we've got is the fact that disadvantaged people, desperate people, deeply poor people with no hope are basically a national security risk. Large groups of desperate people are a danger to all of us, whether they're in a corner of Houston or in another corner of the world. We now have all the sociological statistics that we need. We know that in any area, if there are enough people with high infant mortality, which means human despair and poverty, no access to a way to make a living, despair and poverty, and no direct influence on a government that could help them, despair and poverty, we can now predict within 22 months an outbreak of violent conflict. And that violent conflict might be a terrorist group in some other part of the world. It might be a gang a few miles away. So we need to stop pretending that we don't know what the problems are. And we need to stop pretending like we just don't know what to do about it. And sometimes I sense these days what is very, very dangerous. And that is this collective, almost viral thought form that the world is going to hell in a handbasket. Well, this thought that the world is going to hell in a handbasket is as dangerous as any of those probability vectors that we've mentioned. We have to educate the girls. We know what we have to do. We have to feed these children. We know what we have to do. We have to give these women around the world educational opportunity. We know what we have to do. And slowly but surely, ladies and gentlemen, we will turn the Titanic around. We must turn the Titanic around. When we were in school, we were taught what evolution is. If a planet, if a species is moving in a direction that is maladaptive for its survival, it either mutates and goes in another behavioral direction, or it goes extinct. And today, the human race, the only species that is known for its own systematic destruction of its own habitat, and even perhaps more dangerously, the only species that simply fights too much for its own survival. Well, I believe that hope is a moral imperative. And I believe that while it's true that if you look at the world today and you're not grieving and you're not crying, looking at some of the suffering, the unnecessary human suffering that goes on this planet, it's like you're not conscious of what's happening. But I think it's also true, because I'm a woman of faith and I believe in miracles. I think it's also true if you're not rejoicing in the possibilities of how this planet can rise up to its own divine, God-created potential, then you're also in some way spiritually immature in your outlook. We can have miracles, but we will have them when there are enough miracle workers among us. And miracles occur naturally as expressions of love. We make ourselves available. We say to God, use me. And no matter what religious or spiritual tradition anyone in this room is rooted within, or it came from, or an agnostic, or an atheist, anyone who believes that love has something that no other power has, when we say to love, use me, then that's an army boy. You're called up immediately. And you're sent to the front lines immediately. And so many of us want to know, what can we do? Well, tonight, let me tell you one thing you can do. You can be a results volunteer. We all want to know, well, I'd like to give some money, I'd like to give some effort, but, I need to know it's an organization of integrity. I need to know it's an organization of effectiveness. I need to know they do good work and that I'm not wasting my time and I'm not wasting my money. Results is for you. And I'm so honored by the work, to see the work they do, how nonpartisan it is in Washington. I have been there for their events. I've seen Democratic lawmakers get up, stand up in support of results. I've seen Republican lawmakers get up, stand up in support of results. No side of the political spectrum has a monopoly on care that these children get fed, or compassion. I believe when President Eisenhower said, the American mind at its best is liberal and conservative. Neither is both, he said. The American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. The work of an organization like Results should not be a left-right issue. The work of an organization like Results is love's issue. And in my mind, and I know in the mind of many of us, it is God's work. It is love's work. And it is the only work that will do the job. So when we have people like Joanne Carter and Sam Daly Harris and Results, when you have a Results group in Houston, when you have somebody who can tell you, this is the letter you write, these are the people, and you know, it's so exciting. I've been with people who think they don't know anything about politics or activism, they don't know what to do, and then they just spend a few days in these organizations or in Washington, D.C., lobbying congresspeople and senators and getting a taste of what it is to be a citizen activist. I've just seen people blossom because I think that's what we all want. We all want to feel that we're part of the solution. And hope is born of participation in hopeful solutions. To me, that's what Results not only provides for so many thousands of people throughout the United States, but I'm here because it has provided that kind of hope to me. It has made me feel that it is worth my time to get on a plane, or it is worth my time to write something, or it is worth my money to send a check, whatever it is. So thank you, Joanne, and thank you, Claudia, and thank you, David, and thank you, all of you who are the Results volunteers in this town. Thank you for those of you who have come to this dinner. Thank all of you who are in your own way, either that this is your first exposure to Results, or you're already a donor, or you're already a volunteer. We all give the resources that are appropriate for us to give at any particular time. It's a race for time. It's a race for time on the planet today. The haters are out there, ladies and gentlemen, but I hope tonight more than ever before that the whole universe can register. The lovers, we're here too. Thank you very, very much.
Inspired. Thank you very much for those extremely inspirational words. I think that will be reverberating for weeks, unpacking everything that you said and figuring out how to keep that mission alive as I move forward. So thank you very much for